Good evening, everybody. Good evening. Thank you all so much for coming tonight to see our Murphy visiting speaker in classics, Dr. Phil Waddell. He is coming to us from the University of Arizona, having received his PhD at the University of Missouri. He is a rising star in Tacitian studies and on the Roman emperors. He is currently finishing up his first monograph entitled Tacitian Visual Narratives. I have it now. So without further ado, let's get into it.
I'd like to start off by thanking not only Hendrix College, but the Hendrix Murphy Foundation. This has been a marvelous trip and I really enjoyed it. So tonight we're going to look at the Emperor Nero. Here he is. And looking at some interesting things about Nero and how he's received, how the views on him have changed from what seems to be in antiquity a very, very unique and negative view to kind of different views. And he kind of goes back and forth. He is one of these strange emperors. He's usually a bad emperor. Okay, when you have the goodies and the baddies, he's definitely one of the bad ones. Augustus is good, Titus is good, Vespasian is good. But Nero is down there with Caligula, Caracalla, Heliogabalus as bad. Okay, he's done a lot of things wrong, including killed two of his wives, one of whom was his adopted sister. He killed his stepbrother, his mother. We'll talk more about the matricide. And killed multiple senators and equestrians. And it's hard to kind of sort this out. We'll get into why this is difficult to sort out with in terms of our sources. But strangely, people seem to have missed him once he died. Almost immediately. And we'll get into kind of how we know that this happened, where this view that we have of him as this horrible monster who's killing his own family. In fact, much of the Julio-Claudian line was assassinated by Nero. Why people could miss him after that. He sounds like the most horrible emperor ever. And indeed, that's kind of the opinion we have of him today. But there is another view of him. So I want to look at not only Tacitus's views of him as opposed to Suetonius's and Dio's, but also how he's received in Christian late antiquity, the Middle Ages, and his enduring reception through the Renaissance, the 20th century, and even today. We have one of the strange, odd moments is that Trajan, okay, one of the best of the goodies, Pliny called him the Optimus Princeps, the best emperor ever, said that no emperor ever could ever beat the Quinquennium Neronis, the first 5 years of Nero. After that, there's no point in being an emperor anymore because Nero was that amazing. I won't say good, but that amazing. There's a lot of views about him from antiquity, and some of these carry on and into the 20th and sometimes the 21st century. He's dead but destined to return. He's one of these people who, yes, he's dead, but he's still around. Or that he never died. He's in hiding someplace, but will return. These are people like the sleeping rulers. Okay, so King Arthur, Charlemagne, Frederick Barbarossa, Frederick II, Ivan the Terrible. These people, for whatever reason, whether they're good or bad, and I shouldn't forget the most recent one, Elvis, who is still alive. Well, we know Elvis died. We know that. We know he's buried in Graceland, except that he's still alive, and that's fine. And there are reasons, psychological and sociological reasons why this ruler phenomenon happens. Often these are very powerful people, whether for good or ill, and in fact, most of those people that I just named did a lot of horrible things, but they're very powerful. And so the thought is that they would come back and that there would be, that they would help a certain huge group of people. For Nero, it's the what's usually called the Greek East in Parthia, that he would come back and finally put those darn Romans into place, just like he used to when he was alive. And then this gets turned into other things. This statue, by the way, just to show that Nero was not entirely forgotten, this statue was put up 7 years ago in Nero's hometown of Antium. And it's a pretty good likeness, so just in case we think that Nero's dead and gone. Main literary sources for Nero. Okay, we have Publius, question mark, we don't actually know his first name, Cornelius Tacitus. He's a senatorial historian writing in the early 2nd century. He wrote several books of historiography. his Historiae, the Agricola is a biography of his father-in-law, the Historiae, which deals with the year 4 emperors all the way through the death of Domitian, and the Annales, which starts with the death of Augustus and goes probably to the suicide of Domitian. We don't suicide of Nero. We don't have the end of it. It ends right at book 16, about halfway through book 16. So we don't get the awesome death of Nero and Tacitus. We have to go to Suetonius and Dio for that. Which brings us to Gaius Suetonius Tranquillus. He's a biographer and an equestrian. He's not a senator. Living in the early 2nd century. And he has a lot of biographies that are extant. He wrote tons of them while he was alive, but one that we know the best is this collection of his, which is the 12 Caesars, the Vitae Caesarum, the lives of the 12 Caesars. So he has a full life of Nero there. And Cassius Dio is an interesting case. He's a senatorial historian of the 3rd century, and wrote a history of the founding, all the way from the founding on to his own day. So, a good 800 years. The problem is, right after Augustus, it only survives in fragments, big fragments, but fragments, from Byzantine monks who basically writing their own histories and were cobbling them together, either summarizing Dio or whole cloth copy-paste. And we don't know how kind of careful they were. So when we talk about Dio with Nero, it's quotation marks. It's people's copying of Dio. So that's a kind of a sketchy source already. This is actually from antiquity. This is a hand-done, kind of etched into a wall of the Domus the Domus Louiana, possibly by one of the servants, one of the slaves. So this could be from life. So it's not that dissimilar from what we've seen. Anyway, Tacitus is presenting Nero within the Annales as kind of the end. Okay, so we have in the Annales you start with yes the death of Augustus, but it's really about Tiberius, Gaius, Claudius, and Nero. And Tacitus was a senator, but is a brilliant literary writer in a lot of ways that we don't tend to think of history being written in a literary and almost like a novel sort of a way. You have something like ring structure, the same kind of things you see in Homer, in Virgil, and not to create the greater with the lesser, Harry Potter. Okay, you get books 1 is like 7, book 2 is like 6, and book 3 is like 5, so on. So this very literally conscious ring structure. So the idea that Tacitus had to write what really happened, yeah, but he could be artistic about it. He's in a way, Nero is in a way a second Tiberius. Both kill or hated their mothers. Their stepfather, who is currently emperor, is murdered by this mother. They are raised within the imperial domus, the imperial palace, and they're known for their cruelty. According to Tacitus, this cruelty ran in the Tiberian, in the Claudian line. He's also a second Caligula. There's this idea of spectacle and display that you see a little bit in Caligula, which is then amplified with Nero. Acting, chariot racing, the sexual depravity of Caligula, and also the luxurious buildings, wasting money, pouring through money just because you can. Tacitus then finishes the Annales by linking all these previous rulers into this final culminating ruler which destroys the house of Julius Caesar. In a way that Francesca Santoro has pointed out is almost a Greek tragedy, where it's the fall of the house of Caesar, and Nero is kind of the fourth and last act of this. So, there you are. Now we have the interesting, just looking at the kind of way that Tacitus can work with what's in Suetonius and Dio, a very, very common and easy scene to work out. Okay, in Suetonius, we get that Nero, for whatever reason, finally gets sick of his mother, who's been ruling through him for the first few months of his reign, first years of his reign, rather, and decides to get rid of her. He does via a very strange implement, which we'll see, and it doesn't work, so he sends the guards to kill her. They do. Tacitus tells this same story with a few more details, but with something called a shifting focalization, where you are changing what we think of in film as point of view. So we see and experience scenes, first as Nero, then as Agrippina, then as other characters, and we move around the story, always experiencing it rather than simply reading it. Tacitus is a past master at making us see history in a lot of ways. So again, this is focalization, so you're focalizing through somebody. And even the verbs and nouns tend to change while you're doing this. The verbs align with someone's thinking. Okay, and we'll see how this works. First step, Nero's wife, this is his second wife, Poppaea Sabina, urges him to kill his mother, okay, Agrippina, because she's tired of her importance and her domination of Nero. Tacitus then brooks the question, did they actually commit incest? And some people said they did, some people said they didn't. Some people said Agrippina offered herself to Nero when Nero was already drunk as a way of solidifying her power. Some people say now Nero was that depraved. Tacitus kind of leaves the question aside. And whatever happened, but this was tied to this. Nero's thought process, fine, I'll do it. And then we get into Nero's head. This is the first time we vocalize. Well, I need to kill them all. Poison, a sword, or something else. And we go through the whole process. Well, there's problems. Okay? He's already poisoned his stepbrother Britannicus, so that's really done twice, and it's really obvious when you do that. Furthermore, Agrippina takes antidotes all the time because she's afraid of being poisoned, so rightfully so. So that's not going to work. Killing with a sword, overt violence is really, really obvious. When you stab someone in the neck, it's very obvious who's the murderer and what you just done. And wouldn't it be messed up if the guard you told to do that said, I don't feel like it? And then where? Now this guard knows that you wanted to kill your mother and because it's a mess. So thankfully, he has a friend, Epictetus, who's a freedman, so a former slave still working for the imperial family, says, a collapsing boat. You can build a boat, apparently in such a way that you basically push a button, the roof caves in, sinks the boat, everybody dies. Okay, this is very Neronian, kind of ingeniously weird. Agrippina, unfortunately, they do it. She gets out of this middle of this lake. The ceiling crashes down. Unfortunately, the couch she's on has really strong arms, so it holds up the roof, but the boat doesn't sink. So the rowers on the boat, who obviously are in on the plan, know we have to sink the boat, so they start rocking it over, trying to tip the boat over. The boat then begins to sink. Agrippina, one of her slaves, is with her, who looks a lot like her, and says, I'm Agrippina, save me. The rowers immediately kill her. Agrippina sees this and doesn't make a noise and intelligently swims to shore. Okay, this is the problem with trying to kill someone via collapsing boat, is they actually can swim. This is the problem. So Agrippina put the evidence together. Okay, wait a minute. He asked me to come to dinner and take a boat across this lake, point one. Point two, my maid was just killed. He said that she was me. So the only thing that could be happening is that Nero was trying to assassinate her, and her only defense is to not get it, purposefully not get it. Like, I have no idea what that was. It could be a weird accident. So she sends a message to Nero. I survived a weird freak accident. I'm fine. Don't worry about it. I'll see you in a few days out resting. Nero then starts freaking out. He said, oh gosh, mom's alive. And the message says, by the way, your mom is alive, and now she totally knows you're trying to kill her. And so Nero starts freaking out. Oh my gosh, she's going to be here any minute. She's going to take control of the guards. What if she controls the guards and has them overthrow me? She never did like me. And so he starts asking his two advisors while they're still alive, Seneca and Burrus. Seneca, this is the philosopher, Seneca the Younger, and Burrus, who's his commander of the guards at this point. And asks them, kind of, what do I do now? So you can imagine where Seneca and Burrus are when they have this would-be murderer, assassin gone wrong. Like, how do we do cleanup? And Burrus says, well, I don't know. Epictetus said he'd fix it. I think he should fix it. I don't know. And so he does. Nero then sends Epictetus to dispatch his mother. We hear, and then we switch points of view. We then become Agrippina. She's in this room alone. It's a single candle burning. It's very tragic, very, very full of pathos. She has a single slave, and as the slave is talking with her, the slave starts to leave, and Agrippina says, are you abandoning me too? And it's this moment, Agrippina, who we've hated all the time through the annals because she's murdered so many people, often for things as poultry, as extra gardens, and things like this. You feel sorry for her. This is the end for her. And it's, oh gosh, the slave leaves her too. She's all alone in the world. Her son's trying to kill her. And then the soldiers enter. Okay, they break down the door. We then switch points of view again. We're with the soldiers. We come in. We see her there. She apparently uncovers and points to her womb and says, "Ventrem feri," strike the belly. Okay, that's what gave birth to Nero, who's killing me. Very dramatic. Okay, this whole episode is extremely dramatic, but it's extremely part and parcel to this kind of, as we'll see, this world of tragedy and make-believe that Nero creates and thrives on in the end. There apparently was, Tacitus says, and that's how she died, there apparently had been, she had asked these Chaldeans, these are people who could see the future in antiquity, or at least they could in historical writings, and asked, what's going to happen to my son? And he said, well, he's going to become emperor, but he's going to kill you. And she said, Occidat tu imperet, let him kill me, provided he becomes emperor. So she had fair warning, and this is this very Achaean, this pithy kind of bumper sticker line. Nero then understands the enormity of his crime and awaits his destruction all night long and into the next day. He's convinced I've done something horribly wrong and trying to kill your own mother, and then doing it. And so we have this famous painting by Waterhouse, the remorse of the Emperor Nero after the murder of his mother. So, gosh. So this is Nero. He then later, as a kind of denouement of the story, he writes to the Senate about this. There was an assassination attempt, which he started making up, and that my own mother's tried to kill me, and she had to be removed for my safety and the safety of the state. And the Senate, as per usual, says, oh, thank goodness you're alive, we couldn't be without you, and vows, days of Thanksgiving, he comes back to Rome in triumph over his mother, and then you get these creepy ghost stories about Agrippina, that there's wails heard from her tomb, and so on and so forth. Nero, this is not unusual. He is called by Pliny the Younger, writing later, a Skynicus Imperator, an actor general, an actor commander-in-chief. Okay, so we've had a few of those in this country. He has a desire to play the lyre, to sing, and to act. Okay, and this is problematic. Okay, there are some kinds of behavior, even now, that we consider proper for presidents. That is along this vein. Everyone thought it was very cultured when Bill Clinton played the saxophone. That's neat. When Nixon played piano, that's cool. It shows culture. It shows humanitas. Okay, but for the Romans, this is a different thing. Okay, with these things, with performing, singing, playing the lyre, acting especially, you are bending your own actions and your own thoughts to what other people want. So you cease to become master of yourself and you become what other people want you to be. Romans think this is very, very troubling and morally questionable. Okay, so this is a horrible thing. And it carries this brand of infamia with it. So your voting rights go away. You're no longer available to hold certain public offices or priestly offices. So this is a big deal. So you have the commander-in-chief wanting to commit this moral and legal crime. And the emperor, more and more, as Nero takes over, all he cares about is the singing, the acting, the lyre playing, rather than ruling the empire. That's secondary entirely. And its empire for Nero is to be, how shall I say, to be experienced. That's what's great. Not to be lived through or to be profited by, but to be experienced. It should be the best show ever. So it'd be a terrifying thought if reality TV suddenly takes over reality. But this is this kind of world that Nero creates. He acted repeatedly, according to Suetonius, as Hercules raging. And these are his favorite parts. Now this is fine for those of you who know mythology. Hercules raging, Oedipus blinded, Orestes the matricide, Kenake in childbirth. Okay, well, fine, you like the myth, that's cool. The problem with a lot of these is Nero's own past. Hercules raging is, of course, the moment in the mythology where he kills his wife and their children. Nero has already killed his wife. Oedipus blinded. Oedipus blinds himself because he finds out, through no fault of his own, that he's had incest with his mother. And Nero was reputed to have had incest with his mother. Orestes the matricide. We've already been through Nero as matricide. Kenake in childbirth, Kenake was impregnated by her own brother. So again, there's incest in this unnatural birth. So these are Nero's favorite parts. So it says something about the merging of reality and legend and fiction and myth, and Nero really sees these as one and the same thing. And he wants to culminate this in his tour of Greece in 67. So he wants to tour the Greek world, compete in the Olympic Games, compete in all the games, actually, which are usually staggered. But for Nero, he asked them, could you please make all of your athletic and singing tournaments on the same year? And they actually put off the Olympic Games for the first time in history. They delayed them by a year so that Nero could compete. And Nero did, and amazingly, he won for singing and for the lyre playing. So there you go. He strangely also didn't really get that, of course you're the boss, of course everyone's going to vote you best person in the room. But he's strangely anxious about these performances. And he told the judges before he would compete in these games that, just judge me as a person. I'm really nervous about this. I'm going to try to give it all I got, but bear with me. And really, he would shake and be terrified before he'd go on stage. And then come on and say, I hope I did okay, gosh. And for the senators who are writing, a lot of the senators and the senatorial elite who are writing these stories, this is beyond horrendous. Because you have a person here who's not only doing this thing that he shouldn't be doing anyway, but is pretending that he's not going to win somehow. Nowadays, we would say, okay, this is someone who's very disturbed in reality and has difficulty seeing the difference between reality and make-believe. Audience participation. Roman audiences were uniquely favored to have a way of talking to and about their rulers. Romans didn't, especially after the early empire, didn't vote. So how can we say, we're not happy with your new tax or the grain dole, or we wish you'd throw more games? There were one or two times, socially, when the emperor would show up. And the emperor would show up during these games. The audience then, spontaneously, but also in groups, would then shout for encouragement of one thing or the other. Also, the audiences didn't sit as we're sitting here, any which way you like. The audiences would be gradated. So imagine all the freshmen here, sophomores here, juniors here, non-students here, alumni here. And you can see then which group is angry, happy, upset, wants something, and they speak as a group. And so the Roman people then are represented in this way. So this is a normal social thing. We want more bread, we want more bread. Okay, is a nice subtle message to the emperor to possibly increase the grain dole. Nero had a unique need for this audience. Okay, it wasn't just the usual, I'm a good emperor, therefore I go to plays and I listen to my people. People were forced to remain and listen to him because he's a performer, first and foremost. There are reports of women giving birth, of people dying, trying to escape over the back of the theater, of people pretending to be dead so they can be carried out somewhere because you're there all day and all night. There's when he goes to Alexandria, he goes on an imperial visit to Alexandria, there is kind of an Alexandrian style of applause, which is kind of difficult for us to think about, but it's choreographed applause. So you'd have people who were the bees, presumably they would kind of buzz in time and that kind of thing. You'd have the roof tiles, and the bricks who would clap in a certain way, and they would all perform together. And so they would be performing also as you're doing this. Think of a really, really large and together pep band and pep squad during, say, an actual concert. This is an odd thought for us, but for Nero, this was fantastic. He actually enlisted young equites. Romans also have problems with this. This is, again, the senatorial elite, or the 1%, and this is a problem. And 5,000 plebeians to be his own personal cheering squad. And they would accompany him wherever he went, and they had a certain kind of dress code. They had to, if you're equestrian, you take off the gold ring, which is the mark of the equestrian office, and you wear your hair long with lots of stuff in your hair, and very kind of loose and kind of effete clothing. And so there were this group of people who did this. The audience behavior begins to be monitored. Okay. The fiction, of course, is that when I'm up here, I can't see what you're doing. I cannot see your faces because you're the audience, you're watching me. That's how this works. With Nero turns this around. So that now Nero starts to judge his audience. You have to perform as audience members. This is what the writer Shadi Barge talked about with actors in the audience. Okay. Not only this, but you're monitored. Picture the disturbing thought that every fifth person in here actually works for me as a guard. And will actually tell me, oh, he didn't really laugh, he pretended to laugh. So you have imperial reprisals for this. For example, the future Emperor Vespasian, who hung around with Nero, and depending on the story, either fell asleep during one of Nero's performances, or kind of left early too many times. So Nero sent him to Judea. Said, fine, you're out of Rome, you're out of the court, go to Judea, which in fact put him in the perfect position to become emperor later on during the civil wars. But he took this very seriously, this not paying attention, not being a good audience member was punishable by exile, death, reassignment. Leads us to one of the other great Neronian moments, the Great Fire of 64. Okay, this is on July 1864. We know a lot about it. Rome burned for 9 days, it was 7 days, and then it sprung up again. Tacitus gives us the best rundown for it in Book 15, 38 to 43. For Tacitus, this follows a description of a spectacle party. Nero has this gigantic party barge. There are all the social norms are inverted. Marriageable women are the same party with prostitutes, and this is another no, you can't do this. Nero gets married to another man as a bride. Possibly this is a religious observance. This shows up in other stories, but for the very, very conservative Roman senators and historians, this is beyond anathema. And of course, if you do this, something horrible is going to happen to the empire. So the fire springs up, destroyed most of what we call downtown Rome. Of Augustus' 14 regions, he divides the city of Rome into 14 regions. 3 are utterly destroyed, to the ground, nothing left. 7 are badly damaged. Only 4 are unharmed. So this is a gigantic fire. Rome, by the way, has a tendency to catch fire. It's part of it's the construction. It's built haphazardly. You kind of build out, and the streets kind of snake around and so forth. The buildings are also close together, because if you've been there, the shade, the lack of shade in summertime is oppressive. You have the Mediterranean heat right on you. So you want 3 or 4 story buildings right next to each other. And unfortunately, they're made out of wood for a lot of it. And wood or other flammable materials. The fire was helped, unfortunately, by an unusually strong winds and dry weather. So perfect storm really. Once you get that fire started, it started to the south of the city, south and west of the city, and then burns up. One of the few regions to survive totally unharmed was this region across the Tiber. It couldn't cross the Tiber River. But really to the north, it's knocked out. And of course, both Dio and Suetonius had no doubts at all that Nero not only started the fire for his own personal gain or for his own insanity and megalomania, but in Dio, Nero goes to the roof of the palace, puts on the costume of a lyre player, and sang the fall of Troy. Something that Nero might do. Okay? We've talked about Nero as Orestes' matricide when he actually killed his mother. So if he sings the fall of Troy from a burning city, he might have actually done it. Suetonius, Nero watched the fire from the tower in the Gardens of Maecenas, so good mile away, give or take. And he's on a tower, this is an imperial property, and entranced by the beauty of the flames, put on a different costume, a tragedian's costume, and then acted the fall of Troy, declaimed the fall of Troy. Okay. For Tacitus, on the other hand, he lists the positive actions that Nero took once he had heard. This is what really happened. Suetonius also remarks about this also, so this is not just Tacitus. He actually opened the campus marches, public buildings, his own parks, and set up temporary buildings for relief sites. He also erected other buildings. He brought in supplies from Ostia and lowered the price of grain. This is what you should do. He actually also set up a new building code. Okay, buildings, you couldn't have wood for certain parts of buildings because those are very flammable. There had to be more space between buildings. Streets had to be wider. You had to have fire escapes and firefighting stations on buildings. There had to be a lot more concrete in buildings. When we think of Nero, and we'll get to this in a moment, as an emperor, we should also think of him as kind of the father of modern concrete and quick dry cement and the amazing architect that you could do with that. So we'll look at that in a moment. Even with all this in Tacitus, there's a rumor going around. And Tacitus calls this a rumor. This is not true. But in Tacitus, rumor can drive reality. So the rumor spread that Nero, on his private stage, performed the sack of Troy. So now we get what's going on, possibly. We can believe this maybe a little better, that he is done these good things, but even with all that, he's the kind of person, he's a matricide, he's a monster, he's a brother killer, mother killer, sister killer, but no, he would do this. He would sing the Fall of Troy while he's doing this. What did not help was Nero's then building, after the fire of Rome, the Domus Aurea. This is his own personal palace, the Golden House. Nero repurposes a lot of that downtown area with his own Villa Rustica, okay, with orchards, with gardens, fields, orchards. There's an artificial lake here with fabricated cities around the side, so that he could get in his boat and paddle around and go to Alexandria and Athens and Sparta. Kind of, it's a small world run by one person. The immense interior structures using much of the former imperial palace, which was damaged in the fire. There's another argument against him setting fire. It actually hurt his own palace. You have in this palace a revolving dining room. This was always thought to be entirely fictitious. Suetonius is stupid. He doesn't know anything until in 2009, archaeologists digging under the Palatine found the turbines that would actually turn the floor of his dining room. So yes, Nero had, in the 1st century CE, a dining room like the Tower of the Americas that could turn underneath him. Moving ceiling panels, push button stuff. You have ceiling panels open up and flowers would fall on you. Okay, or incense, perfumes. The walls were jeweled, and also the ceilings were made of ivory. There's gold all over the place. There's also an adjoining bath complex. This portico here is a mile long, just to give you an idea of scale. And to top it off, the entrance is guarded by a colossal statue, 120 feet high, Statue of Liberty size, of Nero as the sun. It's these radiant things. So very Statue of Liberty looking, even with the radiant rays. So large, actually, that here's the Roman Forum. If you were standing as a senator, you come out of the Senate House and you turn left, you would see his head looking at you. That's gotta be terrifying. And he's a little tacky. Now I can finally begin to live like a human being. Yeesh. Okay. The problem with this, there's a lot of problems with this, but one of the major problems with this construction is that these were, yes, some of the houses of the urban poor, absolutely. But more to the point, these are houses of the urban wealthy. And so you're building your own private pleasure palace on top of people's charred estates. With this, he has also this new Neronian architecture. Romans are, up until this point, very boring people architecturally. They live in squares. Squares are sturdy, squares are big, squares are solid. You can build a big square, a large square, but square. And Nero has the idea, as you can see in this room here, what about an octagon room? You have 8 rooms off of it, they have to be square, but octagons. What about quick dry cement domes? So you start getting ideas of domed architecture. Nero was really the father of the Roman dome. The Romans had arches before this. If you take an arch and rotate it 360 degrees, you have a dome. So this is when you start getting quick dry cement good enough to do this. So he has engineers doing this earth-shattering architecture, okay, which sticks around. Okay, and this is one of these things that later emperors use and take credit for, but due to the problems in '68, this doesn't exist. Nero's reprisals. Rumor persisted, however, even with all this, that the fire had still been ordered. Okay, so Nero provides a little-known sect called Christians as scapegoats. This shows up in the Annales. A lot of people have argued that, this isn't really in Tacitus. This is added by a later Christian source. Tacitus, at this point, goes on to say what kind of wackos these Christians are, and that they pour into Rome like all the filth from the rest of the empire goes into a sewer. So, probably not a secretly Christian source. Many were executed either clothed in the skins of animals and killed by dogs, or as here in Semiramis, Nero's torches, they're set up and crucified and lit on fire as nightlights. Nero then held games, mingling with the crowds in costume. This is the kind of stuff Nero does, so this at least is definitely legal. And this backfires. Okay. Not that the Romans really liked these Christians or felt sorry for them. They would be something like some sort of a zealot, kind of a wacko group for the Romans, but that it's obviously a cover-up. Tacitus says, no, of course they deserve to die, but not for this, and this doesn't actually state any good. You're actually just covering up again. This is, again, a show You're showing the cruelty. The cruelty is a game after a fashion. So this is the problem with that. As you can imagine, things didn't go well in the empire run by this person. You have the revolt of, that is his name, Windex. The Senate names Galba, who's governor of Spain at this point, as emperor. Galba starts marching. Nero, for a long time, doesn't do anything. You know, he acts, he continues to act as, oh, Galba's marching, then all is lost, I don't know what to do, and he sings a song about it, and goes back, and comes back and says, oh, Galba's not really coming, whatever, and he makes a joke about it. And it's, again, this experiencing and making others experience the dramatics of empire rather than actually ruling an empire. And this, again, is his undoing. Nero then is forced to commit suicide, and supposedly his last words, qualis artifex pereo, what an artist I die. He has several tries at last words, like an actor, you can never find quite the right line, and so he has multiple last lines. This is the one that most people quote, but yeah, he has multiples. Weirdly, almost immediately after this, there are false Neros. People pretending to be Nero. He didn't die. No, someone saved him. Okay? The death and the actual suicide and the burial were all done secretly, and they're very shadowy. The sources disagree on major points. We're not quite really sure what happened. But he did die, but then we start having these false Neros. The first is found in 1690 in Greece. All these false Neros, by the way, looked a little like Nero, could sing, and could play the lyre. So, if you're really Nero, sing a song. Okay, that's close. So, the second, okay, Terentius Maximus, sometime during the reign of Titus, 79 to 81 in Asia. These are both, by the way, summarily killed. The third one is fascinating. Okay, in 88 to 89, okay, 20 years after the real Nero's death, shows up near Parthia, and somehow convinces the Parthians that he really is Nero, like really. And the Parthians say, hey, this is Nero. You want him back? He's your emperor. And the Romans say, no, he's not our emperor. Nero's been dead for 20 years. Hand him over, please. And the Parthians are actually very sad to give this Nero up. It would have been so cool to have Nero back. And why? Because Nero was always very good to the Greeks, especially. One of the, depending on your point of view, great or horrible things he did was to release Greece because of the cultural contributions from taxation. Just boom, done. You have to pay no tax ever again. You're welcome. And so yes, obviously Greek sources really liked Nero. And now, yeah, he's funny, he does crazy stuff, he kills senators, but he's a Philhellene, and he likes our culture, and what? Otho, as soon as Galba becomes emperor, Otho, who's one of Nero's friends, is actually governor of Lusitania at the point, and he says, well, why Galba, why not me? And the expectation was that Galba would name Otho as his successor. He doesn't. So Otho then rebels. The troops start claiming he's Nero-Otho. Oh, okay, so he starts, Nero becomes a badge. Nero becomes the lost Nero, the eternally young, the eternally flamboyant, the amazing showmaster. Can't be dead, can't be. So we'll bring him back. Otho could be Nero-Otho. He actually loses the Civil War with Vitellius and his soldier. Otho kills himself before the Civil War can go much further. Vitellius, who's also one of Nero's cronies, comes back and gives Nero a much more impressive funeral. He wreathes Nero's statues. He's very pro-Nero. Galba was very anti-Nero, but the rest are very pro-Nero until you get to Vespasian, who conquers Vitellius. As we've already seen, Vespasian had no reason to really love Nero. So with this, Vespasian buries over, not destroys, but buries over the Domicilium. So over the top of it, you have Nero's baths become now the baths of Titus. The huge lake, which can flood, is turned by his son Titus into a large amphitheater. But they can't really move the Colossus. So the amphitheater right next to the Colossus becomes the Flavian Amphitheater, better known to us as the Colosseum. So all of this is buried underneath Rome, even ancient Rome. Okay, by 20 years after Nero's death, you really couldn't see the Neronian buildings. Domitian built a new palace over much of the actual Nero's palace on the Palatine. So none of this is visible, but it survives because it's buried. It's not out there in the elements. And the scene of Nero's burial, by the way, is also supposedly haunted. This is unusual. Roman emperors usually don't come back and haunt stuff. Okay? Julius Caesar doesn't come back and haunt the place where he was killed. Julius Caesar is a really cool dead person. Nero, strangely, is undead. He's alive. He's a zombie. He's some sort of a person who's dead but alive, or who was not, or who was, is not, and will be again. So he's somewhere else. So he gets to this, again, this very strange category, like we talked about with Elvis and King Arthur. It's an odd pairing. In the Middle Age, in the late antiquity, in the Middle Ages, Christianity picks up on this idea of Nero as this person who didn't die, who will come back, and turns him into this figure of Antichrist. Traditionally, this is the acta. Traditionally, he kills Peter and Paul in Rome, and we know from Tacitus and other sources that he's the first emperor to start persecuting Christians. Okay? So someone who would go after the church at the beginning, makes sense, book ending, would go after the church at the end of time. In Orosius' 7 Books of History Against the Pagans, that is the title, he kind of agrees with the sources. Orosius read Tacitus, he read Suetonius, he actually cites them throughout, so we know that Tacitus and Suetonius are still alive and are being read now by a Christian audience. And he agrees with them, but gives a Christian take on all of this. The facts are basically the same. A lot of people, including some popes, especially in late antiquity, have identified Nero as the second beast of the apocalypse from the Revelation of John, books 13, 11 through 18. The first beast being Rome. It's the beast that rises from the sea. This has been, in antiquity, thought of as Rome. The second beast then is Nero. In Lactantius' De Mortibus Persecutorum, Lactantius mentions the legend of a never-dying Nero who will be brought back at the end times, but says this is not the right belief to have. This is a silly belief. This is a superstition. We don't do this. Okay, Nero died. He's dead. He's a horrible person, but he's dead. This goes, however, continually on until Augustine in the early 5th century settles this fairly well in his City of God. He denies that this portion of the end times happens. Yes, there will be an Antichrist, and he'll be Nero-esque, but it's not going to be Nero. Okay, Nero's dead. But interestingly, that 300 years after his death, learned people are still arguing about whether he is dead and whether he'll come back sometime soon. In the Renaissance, fascinating thing happens. There is a cave-in over the Domus Aurea, and this is discovered in the 15th century. And so you have this underground grotto with this kind of 4th style Roman artwork on the walls. Okay, imagine this suddenly happens to culture. So culture at this point, and this is part of the Renaissance generally, rediscovers the classics, rediscovers, hey, the Romans did this, it looks amazing. And a lot of people paid money, snuck down into these grottos. A lot of people like Raphael, Michelangelo, and Filippo Lippi. And this vastly altered the idea of art, especially in the Renaissance. The best visible is Raphael's loggias inside the Vatican. It's almost an exact copy of this. Okay, so the Vatican, a lot of the private chambers of the Vatican look weirdly like the Domus Aurea. This is reception also, through the Middle Ages and the Renaissance. You get this reception repeated then in this novel, Sequoia's Quo Vadis, written serially in 1895 in Polish, and in 1905 won the Nobel Prize for Literature. It's a story of Marcus Vinicius, a Roman soldier who falls in love with a captain and Christian, Lycia. Nero's wife, Pompeiusabina, lusts after Vinicius and eventually turns Nero against the Christians so that she can possess Marcus. Marcus converts to Christianity amidst the persecutions. Okay, so, fine. The story, as it's written, has, at the time it was being written even, a political underside. Lycia was the Roman name for the area known as Poland. And so this is an allegory. Okay, so Lycia is Poland. She has a very strong slave. Ursus, the bear, this is the Polish masculine strength, which is kept in check by Christianity. There's a lot of kind of double meaning going on through the entire novel. This Hollywood can't resist. Okay, this is just good stuff. You get to burn Rome, you have Christians versus Romans, and there's several productions before this, but the first kind of big money production is Cecil B. DeMille's Sign of the Cross in 1932. This is a film version of Wilson Barrett's play. Wilson Barrett did a play in 1896, which was, how shall I say, suspiciously very, very, very similar to this novel that came out a year prior. He never acknowledged that he kind of stole the idea, and no one They're saying that now. But anyway, it's a very similar story. You have still a Roman soldier named Marcus falls in love with Mercia, who in this case we lose a lot of the Polish symbolism, and she's merely a Christian, okay, during the age of Nero. DeMille, very fascinatingly, played with sexuality in the film. Okay, this is before code, so there was no rating system, there was no anything. You could show anything on film, and DeMille does. There's nudity, open sexuality, stuff you can't see until 70s or 80s, okay, when code really began to change. And you have then the opulence of Nero's court, and especially Poppaea Sabina, played unforgettably by Claudette Colbert, with the pure and innocent Christians. Okay, so not really hard to figure out the secret message here. Romans bad, Christians good. Okay, this is DeMille. It's a great movie, actually. You should see it. It's a little dated. This is fascinating. The 1944 re-release, okay, in addition to taking out all the sexuality because there's code now, mostly because of this film, by the way, they're bookending segments with people, soldiers flying over Italy and relating tales of a similar time. This is, again, in the middle of World War II, and it's bookending with this. So you have this idea of soldiers flying and conquering the fascists to Christians conquering these evil Roman emperors. There's a lot of kind of fascism and Nero linking to fascism, not least because Benito Mussolini and Adolf Hitler used a lot of these Roman symbols, including the Roman salute, the fasces, in this kind of creation. So that, again, there is a political meaning, but it's not the same as Sinkwitz's novel. Charles Lawton shows up as almost as a side note, as a bored, almost bored to tears, cruel Nero, totally controlled by his wife. He usually in the film can't be bothered to order people to be put to death, just kind of sure whatever, and kind of goes back to sleeping or eating. It's really Claudette Colbert kind of vehicle. This is followed up in 1951 by a huge production, MGM, by Merlin Roy's Quo Vadis. This is the much larger adaptation of the novel. Fascinatingly, this is 1951. So with the Axis out of power in Italy, the huge Cinecittà studios in Rome, set up by Mussolini, could now be used by Hollywood. And with the massive amount of people out of work due to the war, there's huge amounts of extras, massive labor, and brilliant craftsmen that are all put to use by Hollywood. And these Hollywood directors, if you look at the newspapers and Time magazines at the time, start to look like Roman emperors themselves. It starts to be this kind of largesse. You make these gigantic banquet scenes for the movie, and then afterwards the extras get to eat them. It's this kind of largesse and this giving, this huge amounts of power that these directors wielded. This is the height of the studio system also. So it begins to be called Hollywood on Tiber. Okay, the idea that Hollywood can and do gigantic movies very cheaply in Italy. There's also in this film, and you can see this pretty clearly, this is true generally, of the linguistic paradigm. Okay, this shows up in things like Star Wars, still, where evil people who colonize other people are British. Okay, good, stalwart, nice, honest people are all American, usually Midwestern Americans, with a kind of a central U.S. kind of everyman kind of an accent. We've kind of gotten away from this a little bit in things like Gladiator, where Russell Crowe's Australia trying to do this kind of epic American weird kind of whatever accent that is. But mostly, and even in that, it still holds true. The dignified Romans have British accents. These are English Romans. So this is very true in this. You have Robert Taylor, who's obviously American, Midwestern American, against Peter Ustinov as a very educated, Shakespearean trained British actor. In the introductory voiceover of the film, it actively calls Nero Antichrist. Okay, so we're still going back to Sinkwitz's novel and really hitting the Christian themes there. There's fascist imagery throughout the film. There's huge, ahistorical. There's huge fasces all over the place. Everybody does the Hail Caesar and the Roman salute constantly. So in 1951, people would be very well aware of Nazis and the Nazi atrocities that went on in World War II. Most directly, when Nero plans his city in the place of Rome, he actually uses the actual model of Italo Gismondi's 1930 plaster model of Rome, which is still on display in Rome, made originally for Mussolini. This is Rome in the age of Constantine. So Nero comes out and says, this is the Rome I'm going to create. And interestingly, it's so looking backward, looking forward. So Nero, weirdly, is a precursor to Mussolini. And you do that very interestingly with messing with time with this. So you have an artifact from the 20th century kind of brought back to the first century. Peter Ustinov as Nero is a megalomaniacal actor, singer, poet, emperor, guided by his sycophantic advisors and lustful wife, who's Ustinov, who's up for an Academy Award. This didn't get it, but should have. So he's incredible. But this starts to ask a lot of other questions. With Nero and this kind of new imperialism for the United States in the 1950s, that formerly you could say in film that Americans are the underdog. They're not involved in politics. They're not world-wise. They're just simple, good people. In the 1950s, this begins to change. And so the questions of empire, is empire okay? What if we have an American empire? Is that all right? Some of these questions begin to be asked. What about extravagance? What about luxury? Keep in mind, this is an America that's gone through 2 world wars and a Great Depression. So all of a sudden, in the 50s, there's money. So what do we do with it? There's a lot of these moralizing tales, like Quo Vadis. There's no accident that these come out in the 50s, cautioning America against fascist luxury, evil debauchery, so on and so forth. We have to stay true to American values. This changes in the 60s and 70s. You get the reincarnation, in a way, of the Domus Aurea, Caesar's Palace. Okay. This is when it first opens. You have the drive, so you just drive right through here, drive by these classical statues. All the gaming casinos are classically themed. The place that you see performers still in Caesar's is the Colosseum. The shopping in Caesar's Palace is the Forum, which is done kind of 2 arches of Constantine kind of joined together as a Markets of Trajan, kind of cream Roman stuff, and it's all designer brands. So this is, very much, this consumerism and luxury, and this is thought being what everyone in the United States in the 50s could claim as members of this new and affluent society. This you could, maybe for just the weekend, be an emperor. You could have luxury. You could do this. Okay, so this is this kind of extravagance. So final thoughts. We have a lot of different Neros going all the way to the modern day. Most, obviously, and due to copyright purposes, I can't show you these, but Google sometime politician while Rome burns. And you'll see, I could find Googling easily the last 4 presidents, all depicted as Nero, regardless of a political party. Just every single one, at one point or another in their presidency, is depicted as Nero, fiddling, golfing, doing something while Rome burns. So this metaphor is instantly recognizable and is, in a lot of ways, still with us. So when we look at Nero now, we think of Nero as it's a lot of things complex. He's a monster, but he's also someone who's that charismatic and flamboyant and that able to throw a great party. So in a lot of ways, we're splitting our ideas of Nero into this kind of horrible kind of crimes and maybe the luxuries. Okay, sometimes if done in moderation, we can be a little like Nero, and that's okay. Thank you all very much for your attention, for showing up for this talk, especially since it's so late at night, and I appreciate your attention.
We've got time for a handful of questions, and we also have afterwards refreshments outside, and I'm sure our guest speaker will be happy to answer some more questions out there as well. So, have any questions?
Over here, where can we get a printout of that select bibliography?
Give me your email address and I can give me your email address and I can email it to you. Yeah.
Yes. What's a good, besides like Tacitus and Suetonius, what would be another good outside source for learning more about Roman emperors or not just Nero, but other Roman emperors?
Let's see. Champlin did a fantastic book on Nero specifically. The emperors generally, there's a wonderful book called The Emperor in the Roman World, which is very learned. It does ask you to have read Latin, and so a lot of it's direct evidence from kind of all over the Roman Empire, but it really does a kind of a bit by bit examination of what it really means to be emperor.
And who did you say the book was by?
Slip my mind briefly, I'll let you know. Yes. But yeah, it's The Emperor in the Roman World. Miller, Fergus Miller. Too easy. Give me another one. Yes.
So you mentioned that Nero's behavior with singing and acting weren't ideal. So what were the ideal kind of behaviors of emperors at the time?
Yeah, the ideal behavior, and really you can see this in the good emperors, when you get Augustus, Titus, and the rest, are traditional Roman virtues, gravitas, this idea that you don't even smile much in public. You stand very tall, and you're serious and kind, you're generous, you give people the kind of entertainments they want, but don't enjoy them yourself. You're there, and you're giving games to other people, but this is a very sedate sort of a thing. You don't take pleasure in being on center stage. You look at Pliny's panegyric to Trajan. Someone who's just a regular person that senators can just go up to and ask a question. This is this idea of curiositas and modestia, the idea that you're just another person, that you have modesty. You're not a god on earth, you're just a person. And so good emperors at least show it. Whether they believed it or not, I don't know. But tends to be the bad emperors, people like Caracalla, Nero, Gaius Caligula, are going for a different paradigm, maybe. So maybe they're not evil and insane monsters. Maybe they're trying to be much more like the Hellenistic monarchs of the Greek East. Possibly why Nero was such a big hit in the Greek East is because he's doing stuff that has been done there since Alexander. So, that makes sense. You're using that Eastern paradigm, that makes sense to them, where the West, it really doesn't at all. The West really likes a very traditional emperor with restraint. Yeah, good question. Yes?
So did you ever hear any opinions of other emperors, and potentially even Byzantine emperors giving their own opinions on Nero?
Let's see, yes. You get specific mentions of Nero by Trajan, not only the Quinquennium Neronis, but there's a point in the letters of Pliny the Younger where one of the people who's bringing a charge against one of Trajan's freedmen is afraid to show up. And Trajan says, I'm not Nero. Okay? I'm not personally attached to my freedom. I'm not Nero, and so you're safe in doing this. You can actually stand on your rights. Yeah. So no, they do this. Nero becomes a topic, and it's one that's brought up repeatedly. Yeah, it's what not to do. Good.
I have a question for you.
Yeah.
You told us a lot about some of the more interesting stories of Nero's dastardly deeds. I'm curious, the first time you read them, how much stock did you put into them? And then after you studied them a bit, did that change your thinking at all?
Sure. This goes back to a really good talk we actually had yesterday about Roman invective. Romans, especially in their speeches, court cases, had a lot broader allowance for making things up, and than we do. We can make things up about people whose politics we don't agree with, but there are certain things we would never say about anybody without proof. We have laws against this. The Romans really have a libel law. So you can say horrible things about people committing incest, and that's just something that you say in politics, and they throw it right back at you, and well, I might have had incest, but I didn't sleep with my mother's mother, so you throw it right back. And this is the rough and tumble world of Roman politics, and that survives the fall of the Republic and gets enshrined through the rhetorical schools in things like historiography, which is really a very, as I try to point out, very literate genre. So, yes, when I first read this, I was so shocked. Oh my gosh, how did they not kill this person immediately? And then you find out, oh, okay, there's a tendency to exaggerate these things. And tendency, as you see in all of them, if they hate this emperor, to take even good things that emperor did and turn them bad. With the Domus Aurea, for example, and the fire. So Tony said, oh, Nero, he just wanted to use his new architecture, so we had to destroy everything to try out his new architecture. Rather than putting it, well, no, Nero had a new architecture to hopefully avoid another fire. And so if you hate somebody, you can look at everything they do negatively. And so this, I think, is what happens a lot with figures like Nero. So yeah, it's dangerous to take too much of this at face value. On the other hand, we have an agreement of sources and they don't use each other. And so there is a definite consensus that, yes, Nero did kill a lot of his family. So, yes. Yes?
So Nero enjoyed like participating in the arts, but was he a big patron of the arts? And if
Yes.
so, like would that have affected maybe artistic portrayals of contemporary sculptures?
That's something we don't know enough of. We don't know enough about really to tell. We do know that Nero changed his portraiture a fair amount. So we have a kind of young man's portraiture. We can actually, art historians, I can't, but art historians can date these often by years. This is obviously a post-1960, or post-64 Nero, or a post-58 Nero, depending on the style, depending on the hair and so on, what was the style at the time. Whereas Augustus, after a point, becomes very standard. And it's, Augustus kind of the same look, which is that of a person in his young 20s, all the way through until he was in his 70s. Never changed his sculpture. Nero changed it all the time. So yeah, I think Nero was definitely a patron of the arts, absolutely. And Romans also would have a problem with this in that he would not only patronize the arts, but he would give tons of money to the artists. And that doesn't seem that odd for us, but for Romans, artists were functionaries. They did a job and that's it. And you should give money if you're going to give it to the Roman people, not to a lyre player, an actor, who are actors after all. Yeah. Good. Other questions? Yes.
So you mentioned that there were like a couple of years at the beginning of Nero's reign where he was like not that bad. So is there like any explanation given for why he suddenly changed? And do you think that played into the long lasting of these?
Sure, yeah, that's a great question. Yes, Tacitus does give reasons for this. Tacitus kind of looks at the emperors very psychologically from the ancient world, kind of pre-early for us, but very, very advanced. He actually is interested in the inner human being. And so, no, he was very tied to his mother. His mother really controlled him. His mother controlled his behavior. He also had tutors around him who were thought being interested at least in his success and his successful performance of his role as emperor. So you had Seneca the Younger, who was constantly trying to steer him away. You don't want to play the lyre today. Why don't you read another book? And, that kind of thing. You don't want to, so the story goes, lust after your mother. Here's a slave girl that looks a lot like her. See, it's a lot less incestuous. And so whether that story is true or not, it's that idea of Seneca's complicity. Burrus also, his commander of the guard, his original commander of the guard was seen as very stabilizing. Nero, as he gains in power, has each of these people killed. Burrus and Seneca are forced to commit suicide, and his mother was seen murdered. And so with that, with Tacitus, there's no more checks on him. There's no one he cares who's still alive. I can do whatever I want, and really believes that. And not only do whatever I want, as Gaius Caligula once said, but be anybody I want. So that's when it gets very horrible. Yes?
At what age did he become emperor?
He was in his teens, but he was 18. Yeah. 18-year-old who wanted to be a performer, really. Justin Bieber as emperor. Yeah. Early Justin Bieber. Questions? Others?
All right, well,
Thank you very much.
We do have a question.